activity. All right, let me here. Pull up the market activity. All right. Back here. There we go. Okay, hopefully this looks a little familiar to everybody. It's your login to Matrix every day. There's a lot of information on this screen, and the Market Watch is something that I recommend you keep in constant touch with. One of the things you'll notice, I stopped posting the Tuesday stats for a few weeks because it was after Hurricane Ian, and I figured it would kind of be unstable. But starting last week, I started looking at it, and look at the number of new listings. That's probably a little greater than it was. It was averaging somewhere around 600. Sold 553, pending 702, and price decreases 616. So those are the four stats we've been taking a look at. So what does that tell you? That tells you there's a lot of activity. You can certainly click on these links, and you can get an activity. You can sort it by address or development if you want to add a field in there real quick for development. So you can kind of sort this down by development. If there's a particular area you're looking in, you can do it by geo area or however you want to break it down. But if you take a look at the number of new listings that are coming into the system, 700 in the last 7 days is a lot. And can some of it be as a result of storm damage? Yes, if it's along the coast west of 41, you could actually search that geo area. But what I'm getting at is the market activity. I don't believe is, I think we're past the point, unless you're on Fort Myers Beach. You could be, if you're west of 41 in Naples, there was some damage, especially along Gulf Shore. But for the most part, at least a lot of the properties were inland and were spared from any damage. So I think you're seeing a lot of activity out there. If you're working with a buyer, there's a lot of new listings out there. And this is just in the last week. This is 700 listings, a bunch of them out in Cape Coral, which had some damage, but not a lot. And you start to take a look, there's a lot of listings out there. And I think if I were working with a buyer, I would want to look at this. I would want to set up a search. I want to look at this regularly just to see what is going on. And you can similarly, there is another area that's pretty interesting. Look at the back on the market. 206 listings came back on the market in the last 7 days. And if you take a look at the days on market stat, you can actually set your own searches up, but and if I can bring this over more like over here, and I'll sort it. So look at the number of listings. We have to go up probably to about page 3 or 4 just to get to 30 days. So 75 of the 206 were off the market less than 30 days. So again, if you have a customer that's looking at a particular area or neighborhood, you've got a good chance of looking at this stat or having a search set up to let you know what's come back on the market, what's added, what's pending, what's closed. So you can actually zero in on a daily basis using this dashboard search into what's going on in the market. If there's a particular area you're interested in, you can go ahead in here and customize this really pretty much any way you want, by zip code, by city, by type of residence, and you can set yourself up as a specialized search. Like we just wanted to look at Naples single family homes. Okay, so this is, now we just broke it down. These are new listings for Naples single family homes. You see quite a few, 140 new, 86 sold, 111 pending, and 103 had price decreases. Wow, that's a lot for Naples single family homes. So my point is that don't spend too much time reading the newspaper or watching the national news, because I think it's painting a much different picture than what's really happening in our market. And I think that if you're working with a customer or working with your database, you might want to make sure you get the word out to them that, hey, Naples is largely unaffected. We had some damage out near the ocean or the Gulf, but largely we're unaffected by what's going on. And as a matter of fact, last week there was 103 price decreases. Again, I can look at that by area of the, or by geo area. A lot of price decreases in the estates. The estates, Lely Resort, well, there was some issues in Naples Park and some parts of Naples Park, but for the most part, you're seeing areas that weren't damaged that are coming back on the market. Oh, there's one in Connors withdrawn. Yeah, there you go. So anyhow, take a look at the market stats and communicate out to your database that Naples is still in good shape. There's still a lot of opportunities here. And, you know, I know you're watching the nightly news. They're showing Fort Myers Beach. They're showing Sanibel. They're showing the areas that were really hard hit. And I think people from up north are looking at it and going, wow, that place is a mess. And in fact, we're not. And anything inland more than a couple miles really saw modest damage. So just wanted to point that out to you. We should have new stats from for the month of September, and we'll have new stats for the month of October probably next week. But here you can see you're starting to see some trends down in median price. Days on the market going back up quite a bit. Sales still going down, and month supply going up. So a lot of things happening in the market. The shift obviously is kicked in, and the interest rates I see just unfortunately went back up over 7 to 7 1/8 this week. So that's, you know, obviously something that you have to be concerned about. And in many cases, that's a rate that's available, but not in areas that have had damage or many. If you're getting a loan in a condo, it's very important to check for any possible upcoming assessments and work on that sort of thing. So I just encourage you to be market wise and to be communicative of the market situation to your database, because the national news has done a pretty good job of painting a much different picture as they've been known to do. So that's kind of my market comment, but really keep an eye on the market, keep an eye on the trends. I send out the stats usually once a month. If you have a particular neighborhood you want to take a look at for absorption or for what's happening for pricing, give me a call. That's what I'm here for. All right. So there's a new, let me go. There's a new Hurricane Ian disclosure that we can look at real quick that you might want to put into all of your, let's see, put the Naples area board. So you all know you can go to nabor.com and there's a wealth of information out there. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. There we go. So we have the Hurricane Ian disclosure. This is very similar, almost word for word, to the Hurricane Irma disclosure, but it's something that you might want to include in all of your contracts, just so people are aware that there's issues going on that may or may not be affected by everything you're looking at, but might be if you're looking in a condo community, even though the condo itself has had no damage and isn't accessible to the risk of loss paragraphs that we've gone over in the past couple of weeks. There may be common areas, sometimes lobbies, sometimes amenity areas that were damaged by the storm, from the wind, from the storm, or the water. And if they are, then obviously we've talked a lot about condos. In a condo, you don't own the land and building. You own an undivided share of the entire community. So that's the way a condo is defined. And so if you're in a condo, the whole idea of assessments and repairs and restoration to common areas can result in an assessment. And when you are working with a customer on a contract, then you have to realize that an assessment could be in the works. Now, we've talked about the condo assessment situation. Let's take a look at that portion of the contract real quick here. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so this is the Nabor contract. FAR deals with it in the condo rider. But let's take a look at this paragraph and try to work through it in light of what's happened in the storm, okay? Seller shall pay the full amount of condominium homeowners association special assessments and governmentally imposed liens or special assessments which on or before the effective date are a lien or special assessment that is certain to the identity of the lienor or assessor, this property subject to the lien or special assessment, and the amount of the lien. If, as of the effective date, there are any pending liens or special assessments which are not seller's obligation as set forth above, and which were not disclosed in writing, then your buyer does have the opportunity, if the seller didn't disclose the possibility of a special assessment. There's a window that allows the buyer to get out of the contract if the seller doesn't pay the portion in excess of 1% of the purchase price. So 1% of the purchase price can be a reasonable amount of money or a small amount of money. If you're dealing with a $300,000 property, it's what, $3,000, which if most assessments are going to be above that, and the seller would then have to pay the portion of that. So why do we have the Hurricane Irma disclosure? we have the Hurricane Irma disclosure to remind people that there is the possibility of special assessment, and that that's something that people, you need to worry about. So I think it's important when you're dealing in contracts and you're representing the buyer or the seller that you include that Hurricane Irma assessment or disclosure, so that there's no question that that there's no notification about the possibility of special assessments. Back up again. All right. Back to my people here. Back to my disclosure. Okay, so you see that in this disclosure, and you see that it's asking everybody to sign it. And it's also talking about special assessments, which may or may not be known as to the amount or the date that they're going to be required. In many cases, there's damage, there's insurance, and then there's whatever cost there is to the community above and beyond the insurance. So we saw Hurricane Irma assessments coming as late as this year, and that was 5 years ago. So you have to be aware of the fact that there's an insurance claim process that goes on to start with, and then based on that claim, there may be litigation to dispute it, and in all cases, eventually it comes back to the homeowner association or condo association who spent X amount of dollars and only collected Y. So that's usually the results in a special assessment. So all we're doing is saying, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer and Mr. and Mrs. Seller, want you to let you know that there could be some issues out there into the future. And we're disclosing that so that you can't come back and say, well, you didn't tell me about that. You'll have to pay the difference between 1% and the special assessment. And I know that there are a number of condos down on Marco Island that are just now facing Hurricane Irma assessments, and those are becoming pretty well finalized, but there are some communities that are just getting them now. So you have to be aware of what's going on in the market, and if you're looking in the condo, make sure you reach out to the management company and make sure that you're aware of the possibility of anything that might affect your customer. So, I mean, we've had cases where customers become very unhappy because they learn at the closing table that there are, special assessments that are going to be passed on to the buyer, and the buyer, hopefully knew about them, but if they did not, that's a source of concern to the buyer that they're inheriting special assessments that they didn't know anything about. So be careful with that. Make sure you do your homework up front. Most of the time there's property managers, or there's actually offices on the premise of some of the larger condos that you can go to and get that information. So try to be out front and help your customer to know about these things as much as possible. All right. So today's topic is buyer broker agreements. Why do we have them, and what do we know about them, and what are the thoughts? There's a designation in NAR called ABR, Accredited Buyer's Representative, and you can take that at the board. It's usually done, I think it's 2 days, and you go through all of the reasons why you should get into a buyer broker relationship in writing with a customer. And it's your choice as to whether you want to enter into a buyer broker agreement with your customer. A lot of people feel like it's a little bit too aggressive when you're first meeting a customer. And I've had my share of boo-hoo calls because the buyer that you were working with all of a sudden disappeared and showed up with another agent, or actually went to the listing agent and went into contract with them thinking they're going to get a better deal. So, my experience as an agent here for many years when I first started out, it's a resort, still very much a resort environment. Not everybody lives here year round. Not everybody moves here to live here year round. So you have very much of a resort, second home, vacation home environment. And to me, there's less loyalty inherent in those relationships. People will come to an open house and, you'll say to them, gee, are you working with a realtor? And they say, nah, we just want to look at your place. So you can be in relationship with them, send them some other listings, and all of a sudden, another realtor will pop in and go, oh, those are my customers. Well, they didn't identify themselves at the open house, so how are you to know? But there's I don't know, there's more of a transient nature of realtor relationships, I think, in this market than in some of the more traditional markets. But you can always elect to sit down with your customer as you're starting to work with them and suggest that you at least have a discussion with them about loyalty. You're going to invest a lot of your time. You're going to be showing a lot of properties. You're going to be working on their behalf, doing comparative market analysis and taking a look at which neighborhood's best. And it's an agent-friendly environment in many cases because we have a lot of gated communities. And a buyer can't just drive around and find their own place, look at their own for sale signs and make calls. They have to have accompaniment to get into these places. Many of the larger communities will have open houses on Sunday where they'll open the community up and buyers can drive in and look around. But for the most part, gated community limits the access that a customer has to see a property. So therefore they want to lean toward a realtor. However, it's your choice as to what you want to do on your first meeting or two with a new customer. There are buyer broker agreements that we're going to talk about today. There's also loyalty agreements, which are less aggressive as far as the level of commitment. But at any rate, a discussion with your new customer about loyalty, it's your chance to review with them all of the things you're going to do for them and all of the time you're going to spend. And, in return, you expect that they will work with you, or if they decide not to work with you, but they will tell you, formally, hey, thanks a lot. We appreciate your help, but we're going to be moving on and working with somebody else. So that loyalty discussion, and obviously once you've had the discussion, your performance after that will hopefully solidify the loyalty side of things. However, there are still a lot of people that feel that they can get a better deal from the listing broker because the listing broker then would reduce their commission because they're getting both sides of the deal. Well, I think pretty much that turns out to be a fallacy. The listing broker is interested in working really technically as a representative of the seller, and they're not necessarily interested in giving a buyer the best deal. They are interested in collecting both sides of the commission, but I believe that a buyer's representative who's alert and aggressive and looking out for their customer can usually get a better deal for the buyer than when the buyer goes to the listing agent thinking they're going to get a good deal because of the commission situation. A seller's representative is a seller's representative. So, I mean, you can look at it any way you want, but you as a listing agent have a tightrope to walk when you're representing a buyer. You cannot represent the interest of either side to the detriment of the other. So a lot of people actually will, when they get both sides of a contract, might have another agent in the office handling the buyer side because it seems like a windfall when you get both sides. But in many cases, it can be a lot more trouble than it's worth, because the buyer is expecting this and the seller is expecting this, and oftentimes they don't match up. So when you're representing both sides, you can oftentimes get yourself into a controversy fairly easily. So let's take a look at the buyer broker agreement. So the buyer broker exclusive agreement, this is the one in the Naples area board library. There's also a buyer broker agreement in the Farbar library. It's broken up into different types of relationships, whether you're single agent, transaction broker, or no brokerage relationship. So I think there's 3 different forms that you can use depending upon your relationship with your customer. Our brokerage policy, although there are some exceptions, our brokerage policy is that you operate as a transaction broker. So when we talk about our brokerage relationship in paragraph 2, you're going to be acting as a transaction broker. That's the default relationship in Florida. And I think around 2008, that they added to the real estate laws that an agent will act as a transaction broker unless the customer is notified otherwise of single agency or no brokerage relationship. So as I say, we have very few agents that operate as single agents. It's a very, you have to really have quite a bit of experience, and you have to really understand the agency relationship, the fiduciary responsibility that you have as a single agent. And in general, Florida is a very litigious state. So the single agency basically also comes with it the fact that the customer or client, in the case of a single agency relationship, is responsible for their agent's actions. So if you go out as a single agent and make some commitments that the seller or buyer doesn't want to honor, they are still legally responsible for your actions. So as a result of that intricacy, and as a result of a lot of the concepts of single agency, loyalty, confidentiality, fiduciary responsibility, those are all fairly complex forms of the relationship. And as a result, unless you want to get permission from your broker, you're really going to operate as a transaction broker, which means that you're going to be you're going to operate as loyal to the transaction and not act in any way to the detriment of either side. So much for agency, but that's our relationship with our customers for the most part. Basically, the first part of this agreement sets out, what you're going to do and why we're going to sign an exclusive agreement here, because we're going to do a great deal of work on your behalf, and we're going to try to get you the very best possible deal on the very best possible listing for what you're working with me to help you acquire. So the buyer in exchange for that agrees to work exclusively with a broker during the term of the agreement and be available to evaluate or review properties exclusive with that broker and not any other broker, selling licensee, or opponent. So this is basically the buyer saying, hey, if I want to do anything, I want to look at a property, I want to consider a property, I'm going to do it with you. Now, open houses are kind of an interesting exception to all of this. And then an open house, when declared as an open house, is a neutral ground. Obviously, if you're holding the open house, you like to collect information about who's attending your open house and you want to ask them a magic question, are you working with another realtor? Most people will, and especially if you're in an exclusive buyer broker agreement, you have a bit of an obligation to say, oh, I'm working with Jeff Jones. He's my realtor. Oh, okay. Now I don't have to be there at the open house because it's considered neutral ground. You cannot really gain what we call procuring cause from an open house. You can for your actions after the open house, but not at the open house itself. So refer to broker all inquiries in any form from any source regarding any potential properties for sale or lease. Okay, so if a tending an open house, the agent holding the open house says, hey, I've got 2 other listings I think that might suit your needs better after talking to you. Then they're obligated under this agreement to say, oh, okay, well, great. I appreciate, you reach out to my agent, Jeff Jones, and let him know what those are. We'll be glad to go see him. So you're asking the buyer to have an obligation to disclose your relationship whenever it comes into question. You're actually asking the buyer to provide reliable information about their finances, about what they can realistically afford, if they have a home that they have to sell before they can buy a home, all those kinds of things, obviously will be in your buyer interview questions, but hopefully they will provide you with the correct information and any information that might be, contingent on their purchase, like a sale of a home or mainly a sale of a home. I guess it could involve other family issues. Provide the broker general information regarding location, price range, amenities. And okay, so that's your buyer interview, and that's where you're going over all this at the start of your relationship. On all occasions, notify brokers and third parties of the existence of this agreement and broker's exclusive relationship with your buyer. So you're asking the buyer to give you loyalty. You're asking the buyer to refer inquiries and knowledge of other properties that are given to them by other real estate professionals to you, and to work with you exclusively during the term that's set up on the next paragraph 4. As you know from other contract classes, broker Jeff is not a fan of blanks. Why? Because I don't know whether you overlooked it or didn't discuss it with the customer, or whether you were planning on using the default date. The commencement date shall be the date this agreement is signed by the buyer, and termination 180 days from the commencement date in the event of no. So I'm not a fan of leaving that blank. You can certainly arrive at what term you're going to put on this, but not too short a term, because you're going to do all the work and then the agreement will be over and the buyer can go buy, something that you might have spent a lot of time working with them on. If during the period after the termination, buyer enters into a contract to purchase or lease any property during the term of this agreement. So I usually say, give me at least 30 days, 45 days. I have had a case where I did pursue on behalf of one of our agents a claim with the buyer's broker agreement. The buyer was an attorney. They did a great deal of work to try to purchase a home. In the end, the contract didn't work out and was terminated. 2 days later, the buyer went to an open house and cut a deal with the listing agent and never called our agent back. Our agent found it in the property appraiser's website, seeing that buyer had bought another home during the term of this agreement. So he was an attorney, and I just sent him a letter that said, hey, and he said, okay, I'll pay the compensation that is specified in paragraph 5. And paragraph 5 is usually where people get nervous about discussing this with their customer, because it basically says, if I, the agent, don't get paid by the selling agent in a co-broke arrangement, then you will pay me that amount. And that's where we contacted this buyer, who's an attorney, and said, hey, you agreed to pay, 2.5% of the purchase price for each property, and that the agent in this particular case did not get to participate in. So I guess it was because he was an attorney, he knew that he was on the hook for this, because I didn't have a lot of discussion with him. But in many cases, the question becomes, okay, I have a buyer broker agreement. The buyer buys a property from another realtor, and will the brokerage go after that buyer? That's a tough call. In this case of the attorney, it was not a tough call at all, because the attorney should have known this and agreed to this. And there wasn't any real discussion, because as soon as he went outside the agreement and bought a property, he was aware that he owed this compensation if he got caught. Well, he got caught. So, but this is the paragraph that gives everybody all the angst, because it's basically saying, hey, you're going to pay me even if we buy a property and there's no commission, let's say a for sale by owner, and there's no commission paid, then you'll agree to pay me X%. The other place that it comes into play is if you sign a broker's agreement for 3% and you get paid 2%, you do have the right under this agreement to go back to the buyer and say, hey, you owe me the difference between what I got paid and what we agreed to in this agreement. Will we do that? Probably not. It's again the broker that has to go on behalf of the agent to the customer, and it's unlikely that the broker would decide to do that, but it's possible. It depends on the circumstances. And normally, if you have a 3% buyer broker agreement and you get 2.5% as a result of the listing that the customer wanted, chances are probably you won't ask them for the other half point. Generally, it's provided for in this paragraph, but rarely utilized, let's put it that way. So in the default section here, obviously, if buyer fails to pay broker's compensation, buyer here grants to broker a lien upon a property or properties purchased. A lot of people, I guess, are somewhat distressed by this paragraph, but how else will a buyer be leveraged under this agreement for violating it? Again, if you are uncomfortable with 5 and therefore 6, you can put zeros in there. You can draw a line through the paragraph, because you're really looking for loyalty over and above the buyer agreeing to pay you if for some reason you don't get paid. The discussion is really about loyalty and about working together to try to find the best possible residence in the shortest period of time at the best price. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're going to work together on that. And that's why we're signing this agreement. So the hold harmless is basically saying that, if there's reasons, like let's say it's a 1031 exchange, let's say it's a complicated financing situation, basically it's basically the buyer cannot hold the broker, the broker, there's a lot of B's in this. the buyer is agreeing to hold the broker harmless for liability for claims that are outside of the broker's area of responsibility. So if there was a defect that was found after a contract was closed, that the broker would have no reasonable reason to have known about it or to have investigated it on behalf of the buyer, and the buyer agrees to hold the broker harmless in this particular paragraph. Obviously, we all have to abide by fair housing. NAR adds a little bit to the fair housing rules, and that is familial status and sexual orientation are the two that are not mentioned directly in the fair housing rules, but which we abide by as by our code of ethics regulated by the National Association. Obviously, if there is legal action, the prevailing party will be entitled to recover their legal costs. So if we were to have to go after a buyer for compensation and we eventually won, then the buyer would also have to pay our legal fees. Broker's policy is to cooperate with other real estate brokers in the marketplace to the fullest extent possible, regardless of their brokerage relationships, provided that such cooperation is in accordance with instructions from the buyer. Okay, so this might be considered a for sale by owner situation, or another negotiation that the buyer has asked for cooperation with another broker. You note at the bottom we put this we added this to the just above the signature line. It's on the MLS reports that you send to your customers, but please note that there's a lot of cameras on these properties now. People put in for security reasons. They're inexpensive. They can record audio and video. And we were informed the first of this year about a case. Audio surveillance was always considered to be a problem with real estate, because audio surveillance of any kind requires the written permission and agreement between the two parties that audio surveillance is okay. Obviously, if a seller is sitting on a camera listening to a buyer inside a home talking about things that may affect their negotiations, that's not good for the buyer. We used to tell our sellers, hey, you have to have permission to use the audio part of your camera. But there was a case this year that was I think it was finalized late last year, where it was a appraiser that went into a home and there was video and audio surveillance in there. And the appraiser made some comments that the seller was able to record, which, could have affected the value of the appraisal. And the appraiser said those comments are, confidential. And the court said you had reason to be in that home for the purpose of real estate and evaluating real estate. And therefore, your protection from audio surveillance does not exist. So that was kind of a little bit of a change in the audio surveillance policy. But I guess my point by bringing it up is, if you're going to show homes to people, you want to let them know in advance that, there may be cameras there. They may or may not disclose that there's, security cameras on the property, and the security cameras can record by video and also audio. So whatever you say inside a home could be listened to by whoever's manning a camera, generally the seller or the seller's family. So you really want to make sure that buyers are careful about what they say when they go in a home, because if they decide to negotiate on that home, you certainly don't want the seller to know already what some of your thoughts are. All right. So this is an agreement that's signed by the buyers and also by the broker. So a lot of people send these to me to sign, and we put the selling brokerage and your name there. So this is an agreement really between the broker. From a legal term, it's the agreement between the broker and the customer, and the protecting you, the agent, from, with your loyalty and the amount of hard work that you're doing on behalf of the customer. All right, so that's the buyer broker agreement. Let's stop the share there. So this is the audience participation part. What are your questions about using these agreements? If you've used one and it's helped you or it's worked against you, what are some of your thoughts? I'm happy for you to go off mute and make a comment. Come on, Cindy, help me out here. Do you use buyer broker agreements?
Hey, Jeff, it's Cindy.
Yes. What are your thoughts on buyer broker agreements?
I try to use them with new clients. Sometimes I'm not as diligent in using them with past clients or repeat customers, but in this market, they all work with 2 or 3 of us. So I try to get their commitment up front if I'm going to commit to do all the legwork for them.
Right. So there are a number of experienced agents like Cindy that say, I don't know much about you. I just met you through a friend or a referral. I'm going to ask that you sign this agreement. And the buyer says, well, I'm offended by that. I don't think I have to give you my loyalty or pay you in this particular case. That could be a trigger for you to say, I don't know whether I want to invest a lot of time with this person and find out, a month later that they bought something from somebody else. So I do think, from my own experience as an agent, and I think Cindy will help me out here, there's not as much loyalty in a resort environment and a vacation home environment as you would expect. Would you agree with that, Cindy?
Absolutely, I would agree. And I had one client during my buyer presentation say, oh, well, I'm working with 2 or 3 of you. And I say, great, I hope it works out for you. And if it doesn't, feel free to keep my number. And he wasn't too happy with that, but I have to let him go.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that? Charles, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to know if you have a prefabricated buyer
Interview?
What's that?
You're talking about a buyer interview?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're on the James Shaw call in the morning, he's
Yes.
got a library that many of the experienced agents have put buyer interviews in there that you can
Okay.
you can steal. There's a number of sources for buyer interviews that you can get, and I would urge you to take a look at that pivot shift ahead group. If you're not on that call every morning, you're missing out on about 700 agents, most of which are very successful, that jump on that call every morning and can make suggestions.
Yeah, I come and go on that one. Sometimes it's like a whole bunch of personal stuff and it turns me off.
Yeah, there's a library that's huge on that, associated with that Facebook page that has a ton of stuff in there. That would be a good place, I think, to start. And it's audience participation. You're perfectly free to unmute and say, hey, I'm just getting started here. I'd like to know what you think is really important in a buyer interview, and you'll get a lot of good feedback from that. So
Okay.
there you go on that one. So
Thank you.
sure. Michelle, you're on the call. How are you today? She's not answering. Okay.
Hi, Jeff. Sorry.
Good. I know that you were involved not too long ago in representing both sides
Yes.
of a contract. Talk to us a little bit about that and how stressful that can be.
Yeah, it definitely can. A lot of different things came up. And you just got to be really careful in everything that you say, all the documents, and there will be check and recheck on, especially from the Marco board. I had, they contacted me about something and I had to show proof. And so you just want to, be very careful. And I don't know. I mean, it's great if you can get both sides, but in the end, it was just a lot of stress. Yeah, but it worked out.
So that's, yeah, I think that was, that especially, if you have a buyer, a broker agreement and you all of a sudden are thrown into the case where they want to buy your listing. It's a tough sled. In many cases with agents that are, just getting started, I often recommend that you have another agent work with you to represent the buyer. So, and I've had a couple of agents call me back and say, that was the best suggestion you ever made.
Absolutely. I mean, fortunately, we have a great group at the office, and my go-to is Kathy, of course, because we've been working together for a while now. And yes, I can call her anytime, any day. And I probably have to pay for her hair care eventually for some of the gray hairs that I caused her. But it's having that experience. Like there's a lot of things that come up that I've noticed through these listings and sales, that every single contract is different than the last. And fortunately, you're always accessible, and I appreciate you immensely. And then if it's like after hours or you're bowling, I can go to Kathy. But it's just so interesting how every contract is different than the last. Something always unusual comes up.
So do you think the buyer broker agreement's good to have to work with buyers, especially those you don't have a lot of knowledge of?
I mean, I think it would be. There's just so much competition out there, and you want to protect yourself. But I've had a couple where I was very surprised. I thought I definitely had the contract and I didn't use it. They wound up, taking a different avenue or whatever, or another agent, a realtor, or went through a builder. And I could have pursued it and tried to get something out of it. But instead, I just took the high road and I just said, listen, I wish you guys the best. I did a lot of work for you. If you could just give me some referrals, I'd appreciate it. And if anything comes up, I'm here for you, So I'm just not going to hold them to the fire with something like that. If they're not comfortable, then I don't want to move forward with it.
That's great feedback. I mean, a lot. I personally never used a buyer broker agreement when I was an agent. I just felt like if you don't want to work with me, or if you're the type that's going to play one realtor off against another, I'm not going to chase after you. But I like the loyalty. There's another level to this. We have a couple loyalty agreements that don't have the financial compensation part of it. If you want a copy of one of those, just send me an email, jonesnaples@kw. I'll send you what we have. We have 2 or 3 of them. Some of them for a couple of them from another office, and a couple of them that a couple of our agents used. And it's the loyalty discussion without the, I'm going to go after you if you go to another agent. A lot of people just take that paragraph 5, cross it out, and say, you know what, this is a working relationship. We're going to work together. I'm going to put in a lot. It's just a way of covering what you're going to do for the customer, so that they appreciate the work that you're going to put in and the time you're going to spend. So at any rate, you can surely have that discussion and decide whether or not you want to use a buyer broker agreement or a loyalty agreement. And I think, I guess, if you talk to somebody like Adrian, he won't work with a buyer. Adrian Sabatino has been in the business 20 years. He won't work with a buyer that won't sign one. He said, I mean, I no offense, but if you're not willing to sign this, then I'm not going to give you my time. And I guess if you have a little more opportunity, that like he's constantly busy, maybe that's a little different than if you're just getting started or you don't have a lot in your pipeline right now. So it's up to you. It's there for you to use. I'm here for you as a resource if you want to discuss it. If you want to go over, maybe do a little script and role play about loyalty discussions. That's another thing we can do. But overall, it's going to boil down to your decision and your I guess your value of the time and what you think the risk is in not getting a loyalty agreement or not getting a buyer broker agreement. So does there anybody have any other questions or want to talk about any other subject in the contracts?
I have a question.
Sure.
This is Christina, and it's about paragraph 5. For the more experienced agents who have signed this agreement, what's more common, a percentage or a flat fee? What's more likely to get accepted and not generate a lot of discussion?
Cindy, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I usually put either 2.5% or 3%.
Yeah. The Keller Williams does not charge a flat fee per transaction. That's an agent may decide to do that to cover their transaction costs, but so we're mainly a percentage because you don't really know what the dollar amount's going to be until you decide what property you're going to make an offer on. So.
Yeah, keep in mind, that agreement is with the broker, so, you really shouldn't be doing a flat fee if you're, you have to get approval from your broker, I would think.
For sure, yeah, because it could be way below your normal pay. But like I say, my only take on it is try not to dwell on the financial repercussions of the relationship, but instead on the loyalty and the relationship and how it's going to work between you and the buyer as they seek their residence of their choice. So the more you can establish that relationship and establish what you're going to do for them, a lot of people have buyer presentations. In addition to the buyer interview, many people, I think we've had several people do classes on buyer presentations that they begin their discussion showing them in a typical transaction what you're going to do for that buyer. And once you've gone through that, now the buyer's like, gee, I never thought of that stuff. I mean, that's a lot of work. Now you can maybe transition into a discussion about loyalty and about a buyer broker agreement. So there are also some good buyer presentations in that library from the Shift book, and we have a lot of good ones in-house, and I'm pretty sure that Command has one as an example. So
Thank you for that.
of another way to cut it, and that's also, how do you approach a buyer in the first meeting? How do you set expectations? And the buyer presentation, I think a couple of mega agents have been in here with their version of the buyer presentation. And they basically say, the first thing I do is establish what the relationship's going to be like, what I'm going to do for you, and what you're going to do for me. And then if you want to transition into some kind of an agreement, a loyalty agreement or a buyer broker agreement, it makes it a lot easier than just using that document as your discussion point. Does that make any sense?
Yes, thank you.
All righty. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If there are no other questions, I'm going to give you back 24 minutes of your day here. So enjoy your day, and thanks for tuning in. And thank you, Cindy and Michelle, for chiming in. We appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
Jeff, I
Thank
did have
you.
one question.
Sure.
Concerning the assessments and the line, I guess it was paragraph 84 that you were going over, where it says the seller is responsible for the full amount of the assessment, which is a lien at the time of closing. If if the full amount is not considered a lien, in other words, the assessment, installment payments survive closing, then what exactly is
That's
the
a great-
contract asking for more than what the condo association is asking for?
That's a great question, and we've discussing this paragraph, Nabor, calls it an assessment that's already on the books, the full responsibility of the seller unless otherwise negotiated. So here's another example for you. Many of the bundled golf communities have multiple assessments. They'll have one for the clubhouse, one for the, for back nine, one for the front nine, one for the pickleball courts, and they'll spread these things out in monthly payments or quarterly payments over a period of time in order to pay back a loan they might take out or whatever their funding vehicle is. You can negotiate that and make sure your seller understands that if this is an installment situation and you're expecting the buyer to pick up the installments after closing, that gets negotiated directly into the contract. It's in the Nabor contract. It's assumed that the seller will pay off everything that's on the books, regardless of whether it's in installments or not. So if it's a 3-year installment thing and you're 1 year into it and you don't negotiate at closing, the seller's going to have to pay all of that. So I think that's a great question, and I think you have to be careful with any type of installment assessment. In FAR in the rider, there's a checkbox. The checkbox says seller will pay everything up to closing, buyer will pay everything after that, or seller will pay everything. But in the Nabor contract, the default is the seller's going to pay everything that's on the books as of the effective date of the contract. Does that help?
It does, thank you. So just make sure you're very clear in the other terms and conditions, who's paying what and when.
And especially in cases like the bundled golf communities, or even in some of the larger condo complexes where there are multiple assessments and they're overlapping and they go on for a period of time. We had a buyer that was very unhappy. The seller paid everything up to closing and even all the IRMA assessments. But then after that, there was a couple of, post-IRMA assessments, and it was disclosed, but he felt like the seller should have paid that. And the contract is pretty clear on it, the fact that what the seller is going to pay and what the seller's not. So, but you can't be too detailed in disclosing this stuff, because it's a real easy way to blow up a contract. As Cindy commented there. There you go. So,
Yes, well, thanks, Jeff.
all right, like I say, I'm always here for you. Keep the questions coming, and if I'm bowling, I'll still try to call you back. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a great day.